Hi everyone, I'm Agent Scully, hopefully an agent provocateur today. I'm going to talk about mobilizing privileged allies to address inequalities. I care a lot about grassroots movements. They're really vital, people fighting from oppressed positions for social change, but I'm increasingly interested in privileged allies. I think they're a crucial piece of the puzzle. They're located inside the inequalities that they're trying to contest and in a privileged standpoint from therein. And the question is, can they bust those very inequalities that have elevated them to privilege? So I want to start with an orienting image for ally work. So here's my orienting image, and this is one of our aspirational images of solidarity, white and black students working together against racism in the Freedom Summer of 1964. Some 1,000 volunteers from the north of the United States, predominantly white students, went to the south to support voter registration. They were using privilege, their particular privilege, in relationship to power. And Doug McAdam wrote an important piece about this, recruitment to high-risk activism. Certainly this is an example of tremendous courage, but courage for all the people who were involved. The puzzle addressed is what might propel white students to become part of this movement. And then we end up with images like this that both inspire and trouble. The white guy striding out ahead, and not enough studies have been done in my scan of the moral courage and the propulsions of the black students who are in this movement. So we don't want to over-focalize on allies. They're a part of the picture, but not the whole picture. I like pivoting the lens to this picture, which shows a very different stance for the allies. Out front is the black woman who is leading the chorus. We want to lift her voice, and behind her, hopefully, are the allies that have her back. So this leads me to contemplate two prototypes for privileged allies. Those who claim their privilege, and it's a podium from which to speak, that's good. It's a big umbrella of activism, and we welcome that work. But then there are those who question their privilege in order to not reproduce inequality, but instead to question the very bases of inequality. So claiming privilege, I see, is anchored in this idea of meritocracy. As Robin mentioned, I've been looking for a long time at how our deep, robust faith in meritocracy in the United States makes it hard to have the political will to talk about inequality and to talk about redistribution. So meritocracy is the beloved ideal that anyone can get ahead by talent and hard work. This is just one book cover by Horatio Alger. It's actually his 23rd book on Raggedy Dick and rags to riches and working hard to get ahead. And certainly it's a powerful aspiration to try to have a meritocracy, but it's also a damaging myth, because the flip side is if you haven't gotten ahead, you're not working hard enough. So a challenge for potential elite allies is meritocracy sure looks good from the top. It's a self-enhancing attribution. I got here on lots of merit. So here are rather pleased-looking Lee Iacocca, author of the first big business blockbuster book. Now they're all over airport bookstores, but this is a big blockbuster, sold 7 million copies, tells his story of starting in a New Jersey car showroom and becoming CEO of Chrysler. So allies who operate by privilege have a place in the panoply, but they also include folks who have been called philanthrocapitalists. And here's where I'm being an agent provocateur. It's perhaps a bit heretical to poke and make a closer look at those wealthy folks who are giving away a fortune. This is the Billionaire Pledge. And we see folks using power to help address poverty. Using power, this is the power issue of fortune, to end global poverty. It's a great aspiration, but it forgets that privilege and poverty are elements of the same system. So it keeps us from looking at the root causes. So come with me on a little bit of a journey through these pathways. A wealthy ally has amassed a lot of money. And then they're going to give that money away. That's the Billionaire Pledge. How, we might ask, did they amass the money? This is the heretical question. Well, sometimes share prices go up and stockholder portfolios balloon when companies engage in layoffs, pay low wages, or perhaps foreclose on homes. And then there's huge financial gain. So Buffett owns, he's the largest shareholder of Wells Fargo. He has a 10% share. That's as much as any individual shareholder can own of a bank. And he's actually petitioned the SEC to have a larger than 10% share. And Wells Fargo was, in fact, found to be doing reverse redlining, meaning targeting middle-class Black families for second mortgages and mortgage instruments that may have resulted in foreclosure and homelessness. So if that's how you've amassed your money, you're complicit in causing social distress. So then if you follow the red arrow, give your money to address social distress, that red arrow may get a lot of attention in the press, but if you look at it more systemically and think about root causes, then you see a kind of complicity in the very problems that wealthy allies might be trying to address. This is from the claiming privilege prototype. And of course, it led me and colleagues of mine to ask about, what about wealthy allies who actually question privilege, who go to those root causes, who draw those kind of system flows and say, hey, wait a minute, how did I get my privilege in the first place? So we're back to this problem of meritocracy. It's really hard to find questioning privileged allies because we love meritocracy, we really do. It's deep in our American DNA, and we've actually exported it around the world. A question that's been asked for a very long time on surveys is this one. Most people can get ahead if they work hard. Respondents are asked to agree, disagree, strongly or otherwise. It's been asked for probably 70 years since Robert Lane started doing general social survey instruments, and a pretty robust and steady finding is just over 2/3 of Americans will agree with this statement. So it's not just the parlance of the top 10% or top 1%. So how do we unhook that? Because I think you have to start questioning meritocracy as the basis of inequality to get to a more profound conversation about inequality. So some years ago, working at the Center for Gender and Organizations at Simmons with my colleagues Karen Proudford and Julie Elworth, we wondered if women who'd made it to the top might have a slightly different narrative. Let's face it, they've seen every sort of challenge and speed bump on the pathway to a top position. Maybe they're a little more circumspect about meritocracy. So we found an interesting sample through Karen in Baltimore, the Baltimore Sun's top 25 women, and we had multiple cohorts of them, did a survey where we had 108 respondents, and they believed more strongly in meritocracy. Well, that could actually be sort of interesting and even heartening. The fundamental attribution error, attributing, what are the sources of your success, is gendered. Typically, men will go success is from me and failure is situational, whereas women will go failure is situational. Success is situation, my failure is on me. So here we have women saying, my success is on me, inverting that gendered pattern. So maybe this is a good thing, possibly a good rallying cry for change, but it doesn't answer that quest for those who are questioning meritocracy and privilege. So with my colleagues, Sandy Rothenberg, Erin Beaton, and Zi Tang, we found a different population. We found a group of folks who were part of a social movement organization explicitly working with the privileged to think about giving back wealth. In fact, you had to be in the top 10% of the US wealth distribution even to join, right? Kind of a weirdly exclusive membership criterion, but one that was meant to mobilize these very people toward inclusivity. And so we did the same survey, asked that same survey item, and found that, drum roll, 4% of them believed in that statement. So we're like, wow, we've got our sample. This is really exciting. Let's start looking at the kinds of policies that they're advocating. Things like closing tax loops so that we can fuel the commons with taxes and help address poverty. This is not, in fact, the group we studied, Patriotic Millionaires. It was a picture that The Conversation used when we wrote a translational article about our research. So we wanted to know, how do you get to work on structural inequality? How did you come to have this alternative belief about meritocracy? What's your story? Well, of course, when you go into the field, you don't always find what you were a priori looking for. They wanted to tell us really different stories about their experience. What we discovered was that they were doing something we came to call privilege work. They talked about their discovery of privilege, childhood stories, stories of admired role models or historic moments. They were wrestling with emotions. So in contrast to that photo I showed you of Lee Iacocca, who looks rather proud of his perch in the meritocracy, they felt shame, they felt guilt. The more they stopped to think about their amassing of privilege, the more they felt it was hard to show up as an activist. We spent a lot of time talking about this surprising effect of guilt and shame. But they moved past that. They didn't just linger in that. They talked about partnering those with less privilege and the kind of status inversion at some of the activist meetings they went to where they were suspect. They were not on the top of the status hierarchy. They were like, who are you really? But they were very committed to listening humbly and figuring out, like the backup chorus backing the lead singer, how can I be an ally in the fight against inequality? They went public. Some of them talked about it like a coming out experience. In fact, one bisexual woman in our survey said it was actually easier to come out as bisexual, which is itself loaded, than it was to come out as wealthy. So people were really doing a lot of wrestling. And then they got to work on structural inequality. So this is a kind of the second prototype, questioning privilege, exploring the root causes, coming to understand why I stand where I stand as a privileged person, and then engaging humbly with the others who might better lead the cause, being the backup chorus, not the person at the podium. In fact, the white allies in Freedom Summer had to do the same thing, fortunately. There was 2 weeks of training with SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and other organizations to get them ready to be well thought out white allies in that cause. So something I think, 50 some years later, we still need more of, privilege work. Now, I can be a little bit impatient with reflection work when it's time to get to it on structural remedies to inequality, which I see as a national emergency. But let's pause and listen to JFK, because of course, wasn't it nice to have a president who wrote a book called Profiles in Courage? He says, the stories of past courage can teach, they can offer hope, they can provide inspiration, but they cannot supply courage itself. For this, each person must look into his/her soul. So I do think it's important to have a moment for that. But then let's get to work. So what do some of these privileged allies do, right? I'm like, okay, that's good. You've had your reflection, you've had your moment of guilt and shame and discovery and self-inquiry. That's really necessary, so you don't otherwise show up saying, I'm the meritocrat, I'm here to fix things, right? They talk about taxing the rich, a really great program. However, I worry that it's an aftermarket remedy. So we see Buffett and Gates doing philanthropy, amass the money, give it away. Taxation is amass the money, tax it back into the commons. That's still a little better. But why not get to the root causes of what we in business schools especially think about how we operate? And that means talking about the hot potato of wages. Whenever I talk about wage inequality, people are like, well, what, so everyone should be paid the same? We have no middle space for a good discourse. We have this sort of merit-based 400-to-1 pay ratio or some flat notion of equality or Ben and Jerry's 7-to-1 ratio. So the question is, how can our wealthier allies help us think about maybe hard work pays off, but only if it's paid justly? Raising these kind of questions reminds me of the quote from Dom Camara, the Central American activist, who said, if you give people bread, they call you a saint. If you ask why they're hungry, they call you a communist. But this is the edge. This is the edge I want to leave us on, part of me wanted to start the talk with the living wage campaign, how can we galvanize it? But I wanted instead to take a journey through how privileged allies might be allies in this work from a stance of true allyship and a stance of questioning. This question about work and fair wages, I think, is desperately urgent. Our living wage campaign allies from working class positions may quickly tell you that $15 an hour isn't the answer. That actually creates a cliff effect. You lose benefits and might fall off the cliff. So we need to be in a conversation to say, what's the right way forward? When I was talking to Robin about this symposium, I was like, well, I don't really exactly do gender and work. I'm much more located in this work on socioeconomic class. And I realized in closing, though, this is gender and work. This is perhaps the most urgent issue for gender and work, because low-wage work is raced and classed. So we have to live there as allies in that super urgent question. Thank you.